I'm a strong believer that television and entertainment and all sort of media has a responsibility to approach these topics in a responsible and informed sort of way. And I want to know, firstly, from the two of you, we'll start with Mxiety. Do you think the show succeeded at what it was aiming to do?
The show was aiming to do two things. One, give a backstory to Wanda Maximoff, because she never had an origin movie, I guess, and that's a good reason. And plays a huge role in the Marvel comics, right? So she needed a little bit more credit than she was given before. So I would say it did a brilliant job doing that. And then if the second thing that they were trying to do was depict trauma, I also think they did a really good job of that from a lot of angles.
Are you surprised by how well they handled it?
I've come to expect a lot out of Marvel, to be completely honest. So no, I feel pretty good.
Some people kind of view the Marvel stuff as like it's popcorn stuff. You shut your brain off. You don't have to take it too seriously. But I've always believed watching it myself that there's a little more under the surface there with these characters. And that's why people watch these shows, because you've got Tony Stark with his PTSD. You've got Doctor Strange losing his hands and his life work and trying to come to deals with that. And a lot of that, every character in every good superhero has a trauma or a burden or some sort of pain that they're going through. Otherwise, they're just not interesting characters.
In my fairness, I look for mental health messages in everything, because I strongly believe that everything is just connected to it some way or another, right? Because it's how our mental health is how we react and interact with the world. So I don't think there's a story unless there is something to overcome, right? That's why we watch these. And so oftentimes that's connected to our mental. And so there's no story if there's no mental health arc in my mind.
You both know the question I want to ask is, are they required to? Because as you said, Mike, you feel like entertainment media has a responsibility to handle these things sensitively, accurately. I'm the one weird person that's out here that actually disagrees with that. I think that entertainment media doesn't, and I kind of put the onus on the viewer, like in the idea that we shouldn't be looking to entertainment media for our education on mental health.
You say people don't go to television for their mental health education, but the problem is that I feel that many get it from entertainment. Entertainment has created all these assumptions. This show is the perfect example. When it actually takes it seriously, it gives the audience so much more. TV doesn't have to be serious. It doesn't have to be super deep all the time. But isn't it better if it is?
I would say it is, and not even necessarily just from the point of view of mental health being handled correctly. I would say that as someone who struggles with their mental health, watching a show where it's handled accurately, that actually gives you more of a connection. And ultimately, the best storytelling in the world is the one where you see a little bit of yourself in what's being displayed on the screen. And I have bipolar disorder, and there's been two major sort of variations of bipolar disorder shown in TV shows, one of which being Homeland, which didn't match my experience of bipolar disorder at all. The other one is in the current season of Grey's Anatomy, which matches my experience of bipolar disorder so closely that it's painful. You could even get a team of experts on a certain situation to come in and talk about it, and that still doesn't account, because mental health is a spectrum, but each condition within mental health is a spectrum in itself.
Basically what you're saying is it can be interpreted in different ways by different people, essentially, and there's not one perfect way to represent like this sort of thing. Like a common system that's used in media, again, has long fallen out of value, is the Kubler-Ross model of loss, the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. A lot of that is it's good shorthand for explaining the experience, but it's not necessarily accurate to what psychologists have observed. And this was based on an article I read on USA Today, actually, and the American Psychological Association explains complicated grief as a response to death or something to other significant loss of trauma. Grief doesn't necessarily have to be about someone dying. It can be about loss of just something in your life that deviates significantly from normal expectations, and it's often categorized by someone being exceptionally devastated by the experience and pulling that experience into themselves. And to me, WandaVision basically exemplified that perfectly, because if you remember episode 8, she has those scenes where she is burdened by like seeing Vision and realizing that he's not there anymore. There's nothing inside his head, and pushed on by Hayward. What an asshole. And then she goes to the house and there's nothing there. And she basically just immediately, the grief that she'd only just started processing a couple of days ago just hit her like a truck. And her powers, which she does not have control over, just exploded and consumed the entire village. And she started resorting to excessive avoidance of the pain that she was experiencing in quite a literal fashion. How do you feel specifically with the grief, the way that they handled it and the way that they express it in the show?
I feel very close to Wanda in a way that I had not experienced with another Marvel character before Black Widow. And once again, they took, an Eastern European character and kind of transplanted them in America. And then they're showing, they had this immigrant perspective that not a lot of shows had, right? Like she's in America and she's safe, but they showed her in her room watching sitcoms that made her feel good because as a kid she watched them. So I literally did the same. As a kid in Russia, I would watch sitcoms in English, and that is how I retained the English language I had after my mother kidnapped me and moved me to Russia. So I understand that whole, you kind of touched upon the fact that whether or not entertainment has a responsibility and whether it actually, has to depict things in a way, it does. I think Wanda's example is actually in its own the example of that, right? She watched Leave It to Beaver. She watched all these shows, and they then affected how she processed her grief, because we watch television in some way, maybe not we. I watch television as a way to understand humans better. Pirated DVDs, and they were using them as a way to like understand the rest of the world and learn the language. Like that's all real. I mean, yes, it's heightened because it's still television, but like no, that's all real. I mean, I might have not lived through a war, but I did have my own trauma, and I'm not one. I can't diagnose Wanda, and I'm not pretending to, but I will say. I don't think anybody would argue with me when saying she has compounded trauma, right? Yeah. Like over and over again, she gets abandoned inadvertently, not because they want to, but she gets left by herself, and more people that she loves get torn away from her. She is left with these powers that she doesn't understand, right? And that Agatha uses that against her, and that comes through in the last episode, and then she also has to confront what happens after, right? Like the anger the people in the village experience towards her, and she doesn't blame them. So I think that it's a great cycle of taking responsibility for trauma. I think it's a great depiction of trauma. I think it's a great depiction of going through trauma and how you hurt other people as you're trying to process it yourself.
I would agree with a lot of what Em said, to be honest. And again, I'm also not capable of diagnosing, but I thought that episode 8 in particular showed just trauma after trauma after trauma. So you actually sat there at the end of it thinking, you know what, it's actually a miracle that things aren't even worse, for this person. And I think it did a great job of showing that. There's being someone who's been through trauma and also lashed out to people during moments of crisis in my life, I have that whole cycle of the guilt of how I acted at one point in my life, and the responsibility for trying to make amends for that now, and the responsibility to try and become better from that. It's a very hard situation to be in, because ultimately you think the way I'd like to describe it is that trauma and past experiences may explain our behavior, but that doesn't necessarily mean they excuse our behavior.
Yes. Oh, yes. Explanations, not excuses. Yes.
She was confronted with the people that she'd hurt, which I do think is important. I still think there's a little bit of, and I think she will probably continue to torture herself a little bit. I feel that if we're talking, I obviously still don't think it needs to be done responsibly, but if we're going down the route of it does need to be done responsibly, I think we do need to be shown a little bit of ongoing, like reparations or something. I thought the role of Monica as the ally was really important, and I thought that they handled that really well.
Yeah.
Because that is something that we all need sometimes. We all need the person that's on the outside that has less attachment or less kind of immediacy to the problem that we're experiencing, to be able to see it more level-headed than we do. And if anything, that's the one thing I think that shows could do a little bit more, is showing how to be that person. Like, because if we are going to take our education from shows, which, you know, I'll go on for hours, that I don't think we should. Okay.
I'm not saying we should take our education. I do believe that people can separate fiction from reality.
Yeah.
But I'm saying when TV does it well, it elevates the medium and it elevates us as people, because we become more educated.
I think they do resolve it quite well. I think showing Monica as the ally, as someone who's saying, look, this is someone, because she needed to be stopped. I suppose what it did show is even if we kind of pose the point of Wanda being, in her own sense, partially the villain, even though she was driven to villainy by grief or whatever it might be, that still needed to be resolved. And if we pose the point that there are actually multiple more peaceful ways to resolve things, then I think that's a good thing to put out there.
What was it that Monica said, that if she had been in the same position herself, if she had these abilities to like warp reality, she probably would have done the same thing herself?
I do want to see accountability for Wanda. I do think she got away pretty easily, and this does happen. And I don't mean to make fun of her grief in any way, but this does happen a few times, right? All the commercials are actually parallels to all the times that she's done something to hurt other people. Like, oh, did you accidentally destroy a whole town? Use a paper towel, no problem, you know? So I like that. I like those parallels, but they brought them to you for a reason, to be like, you made that oops, and you made that oops, and you made this oops, and you took the wrong side. And remember when you like helped Hydra? No big deal. Like, there is definitely there's not a resolution to Wanda taking responsibility. I don't think going into the mountains, I think going into the mountains is just step one of learning to take responsibility and figuring out what to do, right? And I think that there are steps more to that. And I think it's very similar to Tony's arc, right? Where he realizes that what he makes destroys people, right? That's the whole first movie. And he recognizes that he's responsible. And then we have the whole Iron Man 3, which is literally just PTSD the movie, right? And by the end of Endgame, we get a good arc for Tony, like coming to terms with, I know I tried, I did all the steps of denial, of trying to fix it then, you know, with Ultron and everything. And then when everything ends, he goes, no, I have to take responsibility for this and I have to make this better. Whereas Wanda is still in the stage of, I am mad and I'm lashing out and I'm taking this out on other people and I don't know what to do. Did the show do a good job showing that? Absolutely. It did a really good job, I think, showing trauma. It did a really good job showing our reactions to trauma. Did it do a good? I don't think her arc is over. So it's not that I'm saying they did a bad job.
Do you know
I just don't
that she's going to be in Doctor Strange too?
Yes. Okay. So she has to be. Yeah. But her arc so her growth and her change isn't done. She has to go through the phase of, I'm going to try to fix it. Then she has to F up fixing it. Then she has to really fix it, you know? And I don't think, because Wanda hasn't redeemed herself for all of the ill that she did. Because she does terrible things on the bad side, And then, you know, with everything that happened in I forget the name of the country.
Lagos.
Civil War. Yeah, Lagos. Yeah. So and then she messes things up while she's on the good guy's side, right? And then she gets locked in the Avengers compound and she has to sit and think about what she did for a very long time. But she hasn't had time to actually make things right. She's had these half measures, but she hasn't been able. Hell, she didn't know what her powers were until, you know, 10 seconds ago. So I just think her arc isn't done, but I think it's very showing trauma, showing they did a good job showing trauma, showing a good job showing, you know, the fish out of water, the immigrant feel, there's a lot of things that it really. I don't have a problem with how they depicted things. I do have a problem with what I'm not condoning what Wanda did is okay. Like, oh, she was traumatized. That's fine. It's going back to the explanations versus excuses, right?
I've been there myself, years dealing with depression when I was younger. And for years and years and years, it was like I literally just pretended it wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
And whenever anyone tried to like, we've all been there, I think, trying to tell people like whenever anyone tried to bring it up, I would like immediately
just shut down
everything out. It's like, no, it's not a problem. I don't have to deal with this. It's get away from me, leave me alone. And that would cause issues. Now she's isolating herself while she tries to figure this out. And then Doctor Strange is going to come up in Doctor Strange 2 and be like, you girl, you need to sort your shit out.
Let's go.
I more than likely think that she's going to cause way more of a mess at the beginning of Doctor Strange. We're not seeing that necessarily she's off in the woods with remorse. She's not sat there reading, you know, how to win friends and influence people. Is she? She's sat there reading The Darkhold.
Her emotions affect her powers. That's what caused the explosion that created the town, was the outburst of grief. So by reading the book, she can learn to control her powers and be able to not cause so much damage. So in a way, I do feel she is trying to improve. Ultimately, I think at the end of the day, this show had a big, I won't say responsibility because Dave doesn't like that, but I feel like this show had a big opportunity, a big subject to tackle, and it managed to do it justice far better than maybe some of us expected, but in a way that I think everybody, it has resonated with a lot of people around the world. And I think for that alone, the show deserves a bit of a round of applause.